The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma. Thank you, sir, so much for your time. My name is Giorgi Isakadze. I represent business media Georgia as an editor and host. And I'm here accompanied by Elene Kvanchilashvili. She's probably one of the best editor-in-chiefs in Georgia, working for BMG English version. So we have a pleasure to interview you. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Mr. Amsterdam, let us start our interview with you summarizing all the points you've had about Giorgi Bachiashvili's case during this period. What is the main message you want to convey through all these Twitter posts that we have been reading and also watching some of your interviews?
Look, it's very simple. In no other country would there be this type of case brought by prosecutors. I mean, a complete farce. Mr. Kvanchilashvili seems to believe he can just make a call to the prosecutors and get them to charge anyone he wants for anything. I mean, the case makes no logical sense. It's very clear from the only documentary evidence that my client had a loan with respect to the business in question. It appears Mr. Kvanchilashvili believes that if you have the misfortune to bank at his bank and you make money, he shares in the profit, and if you lose money, it's all yours. The case itself makes no logical sense. The attack on my client seems to be about issues relating to Kvanchilashvili believing he's somehow tainted by my client's belief in Western values, as was exhibited by the Instagram posts he put up after the Russian invasion of Georgia, and by continued comments from Kvanchilashvili that somehow the West was behind the problems at Credit Suisse, which in fact my client helped resolve very much in Mr. Kvanchilashvili's favor.
Yes, you are. It seems to me that you are taking more like a political defense line, and Bidzina Ivanishvili's lawyers, they stick to the business line, mentioning some other projects already as well within the co-investment fund, mentioning Mtkbari Hesi and trying to justify why it took 8 years to be interested in this specific case with Bitcoin mining.
Well, these other allegations with respect, I think, to this tunnel issue are a joke. Mr. Kvanchilashvili was involved, as was the board, in every decision made. None of these have any relevance to a criminal charge. I absolutely do not know what the prosecutors or Mr. Kvanchilashvili believe that reasonable people would think hearing about these charges. And the fact that Mr. Kvanchilashvili's lawyer is out there talking about the charges, and members of the government, one cabinet minister used the term treason. I mean, this is all a complete joke. It's really
do you know personally,
Georgia,
sir?
Make Georgia
yes.
look like a sultanate as opposed to a democracy. I simply don't get it.
Okay, we got you. Do you know personally Giorgi Bachiashvili? I mean, you're talking a lot about him. You're describing him as a decent pro-Western person, and my question is, in what situation, if so, you know him personally, you met each other, and your attitudes towards Giorgi himself?
Well, to be frank, I've had something of a long history in Georgia. And yes, I've spent time with him and met him. And I've heard about him through numerous common friends. So it's absolutely within the specter of my knowledge in terms of my relationship with him.
Okay, you said that you were engaged with Georgia before when I asked you about George.
Years ago, I did some work for a Georgian agency.
Okay.
I think it was right before the war. And I got to know quite a few people in Georgia at the time, and managed to stay in touch with a number of them since. So I guess my relationship with Georgia goes back 15 years.
Correct.
My relationship with the region goes back decades. I've spent a lot of time in Georgia, Russia, the countries in the region all my life.
Yeah, we are in charge of that, and that's why my next question is about Bidzina Ivanishvili himself, Mr. Amsterdam. Do you know him personally, or if not, if not, have you heard anything about him, or maybe you've heard about him from a person who's been your defendant in the previous years, Mr. Mikhail Khodorkovsky. You've been his lawyer for years, and maybe you know something, or can you evaluate sources about Mr. Ivanishvili if you have so?
Look, let me be very clear.
Okay.
I cannot fathom why Mr. Ivanishvili is behaving in this way. I have never discussed Ivanishvili with Khodorkovsky, nor would I ever do that. And I haven't spoken to Misha in a number of years. So this has nothing to do with anything other than, when you talk about Ivanishvili in Georgia, everything is kind of on the public record. His misuse of state organs, all of this is cited in, EU documents, let alone what you hear from people in terms of Georgia. So there's no
need of any other private sources.
Nothing about Ivanishvili's relationship to the courts or prosecutors is new. This is cited. There are EU documents. There are senior people in the EU that have been talking about this for years.
Then my question to you, Mr. Amsterdam, would be the following. Probably you know the big influence, and you also talk of this big influence that Ivanishvili has on Georgia. And you also probably know that the mining business had very big privileges. It had preferential duties on the side of the electricity. It was easy to do, much easier to do this business in Georgia than in any other parts of the world, I could say. If this was not...
Excuse me, I think you're incorrect. I think if you look at Estonia and you look at some other countries, you would find that a lot of what Georgia has done is not so unusual. Countries go out of their way to attract this type of investment. And that's, not a part of anything we're dealing with today. But I don't think your comment's actually correct.
Okay, let's not go in comparisons with the world then, although I would argue with the electricity prices on that. But my question is totally different. If this was not also Bidzina Ivanishvili's business and it was only Giorgi Bachiashvili's business, would you say that such preferential duties would still stand and would still be in place?
Look, again, I will tell you that preferential duties to attract high-tech business are absolutely standard. Countries like Canada, Estonia, Finland, Germany, look at how many billions Germany has just handed over to Elon Musk to get a battery factory going. This type of thing is absolutely standard. So again, I must be missing something, but I don't see any real connection with that.
Let me tell you what Bidzina Ivanishvili's defense says. One of their arguments is that all the risks of starting mining business with this loan was on Ivanishvili, since the business was very risky and the only initial investment back then was this loan that Ivanishvili gave to Giorgi Bachiashvili. And the defense says that this way Bachiashvili cannot be considered as an investor, but rather as an implementer of the investment plan of Bidzina Ivanishvili. What is your take on this argument? Does it stand your criticism?
Again, you know, I'm in this case, I'm just met with farcical comments. I mean, there's a loan document. There's a loan, period. You know, if you're trying to talk about criminal law, which is what Ivanishvili has done, he's taken some argument or gripe he has because perhaps he didn't spot the benefits of the investment the way my clients did, and he's turned it into criminal charges. There's absolutely nothing in respect to the criminal law that relates to anything you're asking me or his lawyer is saying. If there is some business issue that Ivanishvili wants to propagate about my client, that's something else. But no, he went to charge my client with criminal matter that could put him inside jail without even a phone call, with respect to a matter that went on 8 years ago. Everybody in Georgia should be horrified at this behavior of this individual. It's shocking. That's what's shocking. Not whether his lawyer is coming up with some new argument to try to justify these outrageous charges.
People close to Bidzina Ivanishvili, like his former advisor, Khukhashvili, say that with these charges, Ivanishvili may disappear his most cherished legend about himself, that he is not doing any business in Georgia, that he is just a philanthropist, a charity man, the image that he had been building very carefully throughout all these years. Do you think that Giorgi Bachiashvili's comments on Western values or on war on Ukraine or any political subject would make Ivanishvili come out of this comfort zone and leave this shadow of charity that he has been cherishing for so many years?
Well, I will tell you something. A man as successful as Mr. Ivanishvili, to behave in this way and harness the power of the state to attack an individual without evidence, with only malice and greed as a motivator, I don't think the word charitable and Ivanishvili should be put together in Georgia again.
Mr. Amsterdam, sir, my next question goes to Giorgi Bachiashvili again. And when you consider, and let me quote you through your Twitter account, if you read you'll see that the prosecutor office in Georgia is actually acting as one man's agency. I'm quoting yourself, sir. So my suggestion is, just a couple years ago, your defendant was a part of Ivanishvili's foundation, I mean the partnership foundation itself and the system itself. I'm talking what you are saying, that it's acting as a one man's agency. George, whom we know personally very well, was a part of that system as well. So do you feel comfortable, I mean, in these regards as well, when Giorgi Bachiashvili was so much active and he was assisting Ivanishvili just few years ago, in the case of Credit Suisse? We are in charge of this as well from Ivanishvili's and previous lawyers. We have all these facts as well, but we should take also into consideration that Giorgi Bachiashvili was part of the co-partnership foundation, am I right? In co-investment foundation, yes, as a CEO and as a head of advisory board so far. Go ahead.
Look, again, folks, if an individual fulfills an employment duty and supervises successfully the recovery of monies that appear to have been taken from Mr. Ivanishvili. In the case of Credit Suisse, Mr. Ivanishvili appears to have been vindicated with the assistance of my client, and the facts and equities on that case are squarely in Ivanishvili's favor. And I do not, I would say nothing but compliments to George for handling the recovery of monies. You know, the individual at Credit Suisse that was involved actually shot himself. I mean, the behavior of Credit Suisse in that case was outrageous. And the fact that George assisted in the recovery of funds is praiseworthy. That in no way, it in no way compares to calling up a prosecutor and having criminal charges laid at the foot of someone for reasons that are even today inexplicable. There's absolutely no symmetry between the two things.
Let me continue Giorgi's hopefully thought of line. You mentioned that, this pro-Western statements on Ukraine, attitudes towards this war led to the charges that Bidzina Ivanishvili himself is charging Giorgi Bachiashvili with at this moment. But to be frank with you, Mr. Amsterdam, when you first issued the statement and when you said that it was politically motivated, it was quite a surprise, because we haven't heard of any critical comments from Giorgi Bachiashvili in years. What you are referring to, are those the critical comments behind the closed doors, or what's happening there?
It's important that people understand what the Council of Europe and others define as a political prosecution. Sadly, you're looking at it not in a legal way. To be a political hostage, as George is, you need to be the victim of a political process, which he is. The fact is, George has resources that could make him a political opponent. And he has views that clearly have, in Ivanishvili's mind, made him a political opponent, an opponent of values that completely disagrees with Ivanishvili, and that came out through the war and came out through comments related to Ivanishvili somehow believing that Credit Suisse was some sort of Western conspiracy.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be a member of a political party to be a political victim. And I think there's this misunderstanding of people. I represent many political leaders in Africa, Bobby Wine and many others, who are persecuted because they are running political parties. But to be a political hostage or a political victim doesn't require you to be pontificating about politics. What it requires is for you to be considered by those in power, either formally or informally, as a political threat. That's clearly what the perception was of George.
So basically, Mr. Amsterdam, what you are saying is that when Giorgi Bachiashvili became stronger in his business, when his business grew, and when his attitudes became apart from Ivanishvili's attitudes, that's when Ivanishvili started this process. And these 8 years have nothing to do with any of the business proceedings. Am I right?
You are right.
It's not a business revenge. It's a personal revenge based on some political doubts and some political, theories, conspiracy. What Ivanishvili might have, sir? Am I right in your logic?
I think you are right. I don't think that's all, because it doesn't put enough emphasis on the role of the prosecutors in taking up this case, or Ivanishvili's telephone justice. I think Ivanishvili must have a hotline with the prosecutor's office in a way that, I've only seen in very few countries. Certainly, I've never seen it that I can remember, and I do these types of cases for a long time. I've never seen a private citizen have this much control over the prosecution that I can remember. I mean, in Putin's Russia, yes, we had telephone justice, Basmani justice, where everything was controlled. But Putin was, a political leader. In this case, that Ivanishvili is propagating, there's none of that. I mean, it's really, his behavior is more like a sultan. I don't really understand to what extent he's allowed to get away with this kind of conduct with absolute impunity inside Georgia, though not outside of Georgia.
And the last question, probably to wrap up our conversation, and thank you, Mr. Amsterdam, again for talking so openly about the case. In one of your Twitters, if I'm not mistaken, you said the baseless, politically motivated charges brought against Giorgi Bachiashvili are a very negative signal for rule of law and investment. Please, we are business media, and this aspect is also worrying us, so please elaborate a little bit on this focus as well, and then we will say goodbye.
Well, look, there is nothing that worries an investor more than seeing a legal system being abused in this way. George is a domestic business player. But the fact that he's been targeted in this way on charges that, quite honestly, don't withstand any scrutiny. I mean, that's why they're bringing in the tunnel and some. They're going to bring in other things. I'm an old guy. When Brezhnev turned on you, they would pile on. And I'm sure Ivanishvili now realizes that nobody's buying these charges. He's got to come up with something else. But when people see this scramble to taint a young, brilliant, INSEAD educated entrepreneur, it's only a bad sign. It's only a demonstration of impunity. And, I would remind everybody that in a number of the cases I've been involved with, including Khodorkovsky, look what happened to Russia after the indictment of Khodorkovsky. Look at that economy and look at what's happened to it in terms of being brought back to a completely extractive economy. I mean, this is a terrible sign, and it is a moment for Georgian business to wake up and cause a stir and demand an end to this prosecution. At the end of the day, the prosecutors actually are civil servants dedicated to the Constitution of Georgia. Somebody needs to remind them. The business community needs to remind them, if today it's Giorgi, who is it tomorrow? Who is it the next day? That is what foreign investors as well as local businessmen will take from this.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Amsterdam. Thank you so much for your time. We'll keep in touch and we'll update each other with some news coming from your office. And if anything, we will send the questionnaire. Thank you.
And I will be coming back to Georgia, so hopefully we can.
We'll definitely meet. We'll definitely meet, sir. Thank you so much.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.